Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another Friday webinar with myself, Dan, and the Land App team. Delighted today to be hosting a roundtable with both the NFU and the Nature Friendly Farming Network. Before we start, just want to go over the agenda. So I'm going to do 5 minutes, just a bit of a welcome and an introduction to what we're talking about today. We're then going to spend just 5 minutes running a poll through Slido just to understand who's on the call. So if you haven't got a smartphone near you, please quickly grab one because we're going to be sharing a QR code, but we will also be sharing the link in the chat if you don't have access to one of those. We're then going to, for 10 minutes, just hear from our two experts on the panel. So we're joined by Tom Bradshaw, the NFU president, and also Martin Lyons, the CEO of the Nature Friendly Farming Network. I've then got about 15 minutes of questions that we prepared earlier, where we've got a bit of a round table just to talk about the future of farm funding. What do we know? What were the roles of the NFU and the Nature Friendly Farming Network behind the Countryside Stewardship mid-tier announcement fairly recently? But also we really want today to be a positive conversation about looking forward to the future. How do we empower all of the network and the land sector to collectively work together? Then a majority of today's conversation, we'd love to answer questions from yourself. So the Q&A function is enabled. You should be able to see it on the bottom of your Zoom screen. And so please start asking any questions you've got there, and our team will make sure that we pose as many of them as possible to our panel. So just a bit of housekeeping before we start. This is a webinar, which means for all the duration, your camera will remain off and your microphone will be muted. But as I said, that doesn't mean we don't want to hear from you. Please use the Q&A function to ask any questions you may have. If there's time afterwards, we may stay around, although I believe Tom is in the middle of cooking a Christmas cake, so he may need to shoot off. But if there's time afterwards, we may be able to have a bit of a conversation outside of this hour window. And the session is being recorded, so it will be on our YouTube channel maybe this afternoon if the team can get it moving quickly, but at least early next week. So if you've missed it or you want to share it around, please do. And as you leave the webinar, whether that's at the end or throughout, a little feedback survey will pop up on your screen. If you could just answer those very short questions, it really helps inform the future webinars that we host. Previously, we've hosted a lot of webinars. Our YouTube channel is a really good place to go. So if you go onto YouTube and type in Land App, you can find a whole wealth of knowledge, and whether that is kind of that more thought leadership, or if you're a Land App user or just wanting to understand what Land App does, the YouTube channel is a really good place to start. Go have a look, lots on there, whether it's introductory training, understanding regen ag, or understanding how you can use the tool for aligning with different schemes. So the speakers today who joining me, we've got Tom Bradshaw, President of the NFU, and Martin Lyons, CEO of the Nature Friendly Farming Network. In a moment, I will get them to come with their cameras off. But before we do, what we wanted to do is just understand who's on the webinar today. And the way that we're going to do that is through Slido, which is just an online polling system. So there's a QR code on the screen. If all of you who are able to can scan the QR code with their phone, so just open up your camera app, point it at the QR, and that should take you to a new website. But also, I believe my glamorous assistants behind the scenes have also posted the link in the chat. So if you want to access that, please do open it via the chat window. And what that's first asking is just what best describes you. We'd love to hear who's on the call. So advisors, land agents, farmers, we've got some government representatives, facilitators, other. So some people that didn't fall into our categories. So yeah, we're just going to give about 30 seconds per question just to try and get a bit of a sense check of who's listening today. So yeah, predominantly advisors and land agents. We've got 10% farmers. Just looking, we've got 120 votes out of 200. So just give people a couple more moments just to get access to that QR code. Great, we've some facilitators on the call. We've got some policymakers as well, which is great. A couple of corporates and also some technology providers as well. Okay, we're just going to do that for another 10 seconds and then we'll move on to the next question. Okay, the next question I'm just going to push live now, is where are you based? So just want to know what's the distribution across the UK, or if we've got any people outside the UK as well. Dominantly England, 2% Scotland, 0 representatives from Wales so far. Okay. So hopefully Tom and Martin, yeah, predominantly English conversations today. And maybe we can have a think about talking Scotland and Wales another time. But we can touch on it during some of the conversations, but overwhelmingly an English audience today by the looks of it. So just going to give another couple of moments. I think we had 140 votes on the last one, so just a couple more coming through. Okay, so yeah, England is the outright dominant force in the conversation today. So the next question is one you can type a free text, so either on your computer or on your phone, is just what are you hoping to gain from today's webinar? So once you've typed in a word or a sentence, you hit enter, what will appear on the screen is a bit of a word cloud, which is just what are the most common words that are being used. So we can hopefully try as best as possible to bring those to today's webinar. Knowledge is, there are front and center, clarity, insight, unscramble the mess, understanding. Great. Yes, there's a lot of understandings, clarity, funding advice. Hope. Yeah, hope is one that I'm really here to really resonate with. Is, you know, it's definitely a difficult time at the moment for a lot of people, but particularly farmers. And I'm really hopeful that today's conversation and our speakers can look at this in a positive light. We really wanted to collectively work out how we can help and how we can make a real difference, because it's fundamental to our society that, you know, farmers and those looking after our land are empowered to do the right thing and also to produce high quality food. Okay, lots of different words there, but yeah, I think the main ones are knowledge, clarity, just an update, you know, just what's happening, information, opportunities. Great. Loads of good words there. So thank you so much. I'm gonna move on to the next one. This is more of it for the Land App users. It's just understanding who out there is already using Land App. So if you're using a free subscription, if you're on a standard subscription, or if you're on a professional subscription, or if you're not yet registered. So just love to hear from you. For the professionals, yeah, it sounded like we had a lot of land agents and advisors on the call, so I can see why the professional subscription is the most popular one. Yeah, and if you're unsure, you don't use Land App, please use not yet registered as your option. Okay. Great. There's definitely a professional contingent here, you know, those that are working closely with the farmers, and it's great. And hopefully they will be able to contribute to the conversation and the debate as well. Okay, I'm just going to move on to, I think, the second last question. So just simple yes, no, or not applicable. Have you or your clients been affected by any of the funding changes this year? And if not applicable, i.e. the funding changes that have happened in the farming sector are not relevant to you or your job. Yeah, overwhelmingly, we've got people on the call that have been affected by the funding changes this year. So it'd be really good to get under the skin of some of those things with Tom and Martin in a moment. Okay, and just in the name of time, the final one is another word cloud. Ideally, just choose 1 or 2 words for this one. Is just how are you feeling about the future of farm funding? So what words spring to your mind about how you're feeling? Uncertain, nervous, skeptical. Uncertain is yeah, pessimistic, apprehensive, frustrated. Okay, these are all really relevant and understandable feelings. So hopefully today we're going to provide a platform to have a conversation, but just to reiterate, we're not going to be able to fix it all or provide all the answers overnight. We just really want to, as much as possible, try and bring some cohesion amongst the land sector and work with great partners to try and support government and the private sector to answer some of these feelings. And yeah, that uncertainty particularly is something that will hopefully come out of the Q&A. Okay, just going to give it another 10 seconds, although I think feelings have been felt and heard. So thank you all so much for joining, and hopefully we'll go away from this call, feeling slightly less anxious and hopefully a bit more clarity and understanding about what's happening. Okay, great. So I think that's the end of the Slido. I'll leave it open, so if anyone wants to add any more of their current feelings to the Slido, they're welcome to. But what I'm going to do is first invite Tom Bradshaw to come and turn on his camera, turn on his microphone and introduce himself. So Tom, thank you so much for joining. Could you firstly just give a bit of an overview on who you are and what your role is at the NFU?
Good afternoon, everybody. Tom Bradshaw, President of the National Farmers Union. I farm in North Essex, a small family farm, and then we do quite a bit of contract farming, although less than we used to. And we're in various different schemes. So, yes, have we been impacted? Well, I think every farm has been impacted because of the dramatic cuts and end to the direct support payments, the BPS, and the rapid phase out of that. So yeah, it's a very complicated picture, and seeing those word clouds, there's no pressure at all, is there?
No, but I think collectively we will hopefully be able to at least shine some more light on the current situation, also hopefully give some reasons to be optimistic as well. And then secondly, I'd love to invite Martin Lyons from the Nature Friendly Farming Network to come and turn his camera on and also say hello and explain a bit more about your role within the Nature Friendly Farming Network.
Yeah, and thank you very much. Hi, Dan. So Martin Lyons, farming in Cambridgeshire, family farm, also contract to share farmer, and with a focus sort of on how do we get environment features fit into our farm. I'm also the chief exec for the Nature Friendly Farming Network, which is a UK-wide farming-led organisation.
Great. Well, both, thank you so much. So the first question I've got, Tom, is for you. The NFU is constantly in talks with ministers at the moment, and with all the uncertainty that farmers have faced, how confident are you that the government is listening to what you're saying?
Can I just take one step further back? When you talked about positivity and hope, Dan, and the truth is that if you remove the politics and if you're not in the arable sector, up until very recently, there's been a lot of reasons that you could be positive, but it's the overburdening weight of the government policy, of the uncertainty around the future of SFI and elms, the lack of clarity. So all of those words on those word clouds really resonated, because actually there's several sectors that should be thinking about how do they invest with confidence for the future, given that the returns that have been made from poultry, from pigs, from red meat, even from dairy until recently, have actually been relatively good, and should be driving that confidence. But it's everything else going on which is creating the fog around all of it. I mean, they absolutely are listening, and I think where I have to be really careful is to make sure we're firing the bullets in the right places. And when it comes to things like the inheritance tax changes, that's a decision this government made. It's one they've created. It's their problem. When I look at things like the SFI, arguably the failure of design in that goes back a long, long way. To have a scheme that had no budgetary control in place is not something that we can blame the current administration for. Could they have dealt with it quicker? Absolutely. Could they have had a much clearer communication around what was going on, particularly when they implemented the very steep cuts to BPS at the October budget last year? Absolutely, and they should have done. But the failures in design go back a lot further than when this government were elected. So I think that making sure that we are a constructive partner rather than just shouting, standing up and shouting and screaming, I think it is really, really important. So we have a very constructive relationship. We're meeting with ministers regularly, and they've got a real job to do over the next 6 months to end up with a scheme that really can deliver what they need from a department, but what we need from a farming industry is going to be a real challenge.
Completely agree. And I think it's that harmonized voice that we really need to work with together. And I guess, Martin, to bring you in, what do you think is the key message that we should all be getting behind right now to support those ministers that are, and we definitely agree, Tom, are working so hard to try and get a scheme up and running, but there's a lot of noise. Martin, what do you think is the most important message that we should be getting behind right now when it comes to the future of farming?
I think for me, and for the network, is that clarity of the value of what farming can deliver for food, nature, and climate, and the value to society, why we need investment into delivering that. And connect that to society and treasury, because I think there is some disconnection of what farming can deliver and the value of all of the produce and the landscape that we manage. And those are multiple conversations because that's not just DEFRA, that's sort of the DESNES and other and planning and other departments that we've got to spread those conversations to make the value of farming be a value to the whole of the government, not just seen as it's a DEFRA thing and that's farming. So it's that clarity of what can we deliver, what's the value, what is the value to society, but also where are the barriers sort of around getting procurement and food valued properly and that other habitats and nature and water management. And it's really complicated. So it's about packaging them up and engaging where we can at ministerial level, at civil servant level, and in other departments.
Yeah, and definitely it's outside of just DEFRA's remit. Everyone in society is benefiting from farmers, and the more that we can tie that, a resilient farming system and farming businesses means a resilient nation. And I think that's both the nature, but that's the food production, everything that comes between it. And so I guess back to you then, Tom. How important is that resilience to the farmers that you're representing for kind of that long-term vision of their profitability, whether that's talking about nature, food, carbon, water, etc.?
I mean, we have to have long-term clarity and purpose. And I think that at the moment, there's a lot of that which is missing. So the government have got the food strategy, which they are working on. There's a desire to look at the linkage between poor health and diet. And I think that's something which is absolutely right. But it shouldn't detract from what is needed of a food strategy to say this is how the UK value a resilient food system. We've had two massive global shocks over the last 5 years with COVID and then with the Ukraine war. And our just-in-time food supply chain is creaking like it's never creaked before. And yet it's absolutely taken for granted that we will continue delivering day in, day out. And when we've got the legislated environmental targets and we've got the climate change commitment, but we don't have any clear strategy or prioritization around how much domestic food production we want, the only correlation in that climate versus food is food production, because it's the only thing that can give. And we would like to see within the food strategy there be some clear ambition, some clear targets set sector by sector to say this is what we believe a resilient food system in the UK looks like. And this is the level of production as a minimum we should be seeing sector by sector, because then it gives people the confidence to invest. Because at the moment, we don't know whether the government really believe that domestic food production is important or not. Now, I believe they think it is. The words in their manifesto said they believe it is. So far, the policy hasn't flowed from that, which gives us the clear direction that they really value the role of domestic food production as a critical part of a resilient food system.
The food security of the nation has got to be top of the agenda. We've got to understand what our productive output could be. And farmers are up for the challenge as well. They are in business to grow food. And I think that clarity from the top down to say, look, as a nation, we're trying to produce this much food is a really important thing to draw a line in the sand, because no doubt the farmers are up for it. And I know the markets as well will hopefully be there to support. Martin, are you contributing to the food strategy at all? And if so, what role are you playing?
Yeah, we're feeding in and sort of communicating, what is that? What are we not producing? What can we do more of? How do we get, focus also around the water storage and other things, because it's not just how much more we can do. What's the infrastructure around it that needs supporting, whether that's abattoirs, distribution centres and other things. And actually, how do we get more of the produce we produced on people's plates, particularly through public procurement and sort of things like that. So yeah, we're having regular meetings and feeding in and sort of highlighting the opportunities the nation has to grow its economy through growing its food at home.
Can I just come in on the public procurement one? Because there's been a clear commitment from government around them wanting to source more locally produced food. The fundamental problem we've got is that the public procurement budget is not high enough. And so it's an unattractive market for a lot of our members to produce for, because it's the lowest cost denominator. It's often imported frozen product going into those supply chains. And I was on the platform on my way down to Oxford. There'd already been the leak in the papers that they were going to be announcing a public procurement strategy at the Oxford Farming Conference. I saw one of the country's largest horticultural producers on the way down there, and I said, "So that excites you then, doesn't it?" Tongue in cheek, and they were like, "No, we don't produce for that market because that is the lowest value market we have." So if we're really serious about joining the dots between health, public procurement, domestic food production, we've got to look at how we can get an adequate budget into those public procurement sectors to enable them to actually source more locally and more domestically produced food.
And also speed up the targets, because I think they've got a target 50 by 50, 50% by 2050. That's far too far away. If we want to, really make that work, we've got to drive the budget, the need, and the procurement plans to grow the food here.
Yeah, well, it's kind of bringing on to my next point, which is obviously we've got Emma Reynolds now in place, and I would love to talk a bit about consistency of business planning, but also just consistency of having environment secretaries in place for a long period of time. I heard a stat the other day at the Norfolk conference that we've had 8 environment secs in the last 6.5 years. So I think my first question is, how important is it that farmers have consistency, both in terms of the schemes, but also in terms of the targets that they're going for to plan their farming businesses? And I guess I'll start with you, Martin, if that's okay.
Yeah, and the continual change with ministers and secretaries of states now is so unhelpful, because everything has to stop, start, relearn, and we move and tack about in different directions. That long-term planning, farmers are planning rotations years ahead. They're growing crops and systems. We need some certainty. I'm hopeful that, they've had a reshuffle, that hopefully that's the last one for this parliament. So we actually have some consistency of what's going on and what's the thing targets are. We have legally binding targets for nature, for climate, for other things. What is the targets for food? What is the targets that we actually can put a roadmap to? And they talk about a 25-year roadmap and other things, but we need some of that to come out now. But we need the future people, whoever they are, to build into those and add to them, not disrupt the focus of where we go in the future.
Yeah. Tom, just out of interest, with the, I guess, new environment sec in place, do you find like the fact that they're learning the job and kind of getting their feet under the desk as quick as possible brings the NFU closer to the policy making, i.e. they're reaching out for more support? Or do you find like it's harder to communicate with the policy changing all the time because you're constantly having to build new relationships?
I hope we haven't got many civil servants on here, Dan, but I think every time there's a new minister, civil servants look at this and see it as an opportunity to push the agenda that they've been wanting to drive. And so we've had 10 secretaries of state in 9.5 years. And I mean, by the time they've learned the role, they've learned the job, they're then being moved on. That is no good for anybody. We've had really good access since the new ministerial team have been in place. I was in this week with Angela Eagle, and I would say it's a very straight conversation. There's no holds barred on either side. It's we've been very upfront with each other, that's really important. We were in with Emma Reynolds very, very quickly. I mean, the first meeting that she had on Monday, that she was in the office, and then she spoke at the Back British Farming Day breakfast on the Wednesday. And Dame Angela Eagle had also been in a food resilience roundtable on her second day in the job. So they are wanting to learn, and it's always our job to try and help them do that. But I think that there is so much the department needs to do, and I agree with what Martin said about this being cross-departmental as well. But within the department, there's the land use framework, there's the food strategy, there's the farming roadmap, the farm profitability review. They're updating the environment, the EIP, Environment Improvement Programme, and are they going to hit the 2030 targets? Well, they're not going to hit the 2030 targets, but what are they going to do about it? We haven't got a big enough budget. As we've moved from the old BPS to direct support payments, which brought a level of resilience into farming businesses. I mean, the arable sector has had 2 incredibly tough years now, at a time where those payments have dramatically reduced. But we know that to deliver the legislated environmental targets, we need about double the budget that we've actually got within DEFRA. So they've got some huge challenges, and what we need to work out is, what are they going to prioritise? And then you look at climate change, and this summer is a classic case in point where I think everybody is well aware of that climate is having an impact, and there's a very real risk that we go into next spring without our reservoirs full. Now, I know many farmers are saying to me that we would happily store more water on the farm, 150% of our annual requirement, but at the moment the incentives aren't there to invest. It can't be included within the annual investment allowance. The capital budget of £1 million within the AAA is not big enough. So we're also trying to broaden the scope and bring that in and work with wider departments. But I think there has been so much inertia within DEFRA over recent years that we need a minister and a secretary of state that are willing to say, we've got to get stuff out the door, we've got to get things moving. Now, that doesn't mean we're going to like it all, but inertia is no good for anybody.
I couldn't agree more. And in a moment, I'd love to just tease out from both of you where you think the future funds are coming from. We've obviously spoken a lot about the public purse, but how do we get more private money in? But I'll hold that thought. One thing I want to just flash up on the screen, because I think both of you were involved in this behind the scenes, is we had some successful collective voice from the great lobbying that both of you were doing and a number of other great organizations of extending the cliff edge. And a lot of the people on this webinar will hopefully either heard of it or directly being impacted. What I wanted to know is what's the next big message that we should be collectively trying to push, either Emma Reynolds and her team or, government more broadly as a single farming voice. We obviously got this, which is a 1-year extension, which is great in the short term, but still we need clarity onto SFI 26. But what should we be focusing on today as a collection?
I think for me, Dan, the most impressive collective work was actually in the run up to the comprehensive spending review. And, there was a really wide coalition of environmental groups and farming organizations that came together at that point to try and fight for the DEFRA budget. And, while we know 2.3 billion annually isn't enough, there were times where we didn't think we would have 2.3 billion. So I think that was a really, really successful coalition that came together on that piece of work. I mean, quite frankly, we'd prefer not to have the mid-tier extension. We prefer to have a scheme available which people could have transitioned into. But it became very apparent quite a long while ago that there was no way that SFI, whatever version we're going to be on in 2026, was going to be ready. And so then it became a core priority to try and make sure there was something for those 5,000 plus agreement holders to transition into, because a lot of the time those agreements weren't compatible with the SFI. So they had been blocked out of applying on those parcels of land into the SFI when it was open, and then suddenly they were going to be caught with no open scheme to apply for and no funding for the environmental work. And many of them had been in environmental schemes for over 20 years. So it was just completely unfair. So look, we welcome the decision in the end, but we wish that we weren't in the place where we've had all this stop-start of environmental schemes. The critical next element for me is how much headroom there is in the budget. There's a huge amount of money allocated already to the SFI for 2026, 2027. There's obviously the rollover of these agreements. We need to understand how much headroom there is and how much of that is going to be going towards the SFI rather than landscape recovery projects. And then we can start to say to argue for what should be available for 2026. I think we all feel it's probably a very finite budget which is going to be available in 2026, and that means that the scope of the scheme is going to be quite limited.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that sentiment. We would have rather be promoting right now an SFI 26 rather than getting people through into this 12-year holding pattern almost. But we're also very grateful and happy that this has happened because, we jumped on the bandwagon, relatively early on just to try and provide some clarity. But I'm, really grateful for all the work you guys have done and broader partners. Martin, I was just wondering if you know or have any clarity from government whether that mid-tier extension is coming out of the SFI 26 budget. Is it a different pot of money or is it the same pot of money and therefore there's less available for SFI 26 now?
Less available for SFI 26. There's no more magic money trees. It's coming out at the budget. But there's also more complications coming down the line. Farmers need certainty to deliver these habitats and manage these areas. This stop starting means actually nature's going to lose and farmers lose because there's stop and starting. We know at the end of next year, there's a heap of Countryside Stewardship agreements come to an end. There's a big lump of the early SFI agreements that were coming to an end and a number of HLS agreements. So we've got a number of really knotty challenges in the years ahead. So what is the budgetary plan? What is the space to get them in? And what is the making sure that there's something available months ahead before people's agreements finishing and the ability to go from one scheme straight into the next. No gaps, no pauses, no breaks. We should have the management scheme to say, my agreement finished on the 31st of December. On the 1st of January, my new thing starts. And this is where that budgetary piece and the space and the journey for over the next 2 or 3 years to bring all of these agreements into a new platform and a new delivery, but also in a date frame that works for farmers. Many of us have got multiple agreements with multiple dates, and actually we need to, at some point, be able to stop and start on a date that works for us and actually join up to where our tenancies, our farm plan works, that we move forward with these agreements that fit our farming system, not an arbitrary date in a calendar that fits an application window.
That consistency of planning and flexibility of planning is definitely something that we want to see. And I guess that helps us move on to, I guess, where the private markets are coming in here, because I think we spoke a lot about the public purse. But Tom, I wondered if you could articulate, what do you think the future is of funding from the private market? You know, is there a silver bullet out there? And I guess in line with that, what do you think the government can do to properly catalyse the private market getting investing?
No, I'm still really skeptical about the private market, certainly at scale. I know that there are private markets coming in and out and that function at times and then don't function at others. I know around here we've had lens projects that have been running, and then the following year there's sort of the offer is much lower or very different to what it has been previously. There's clearly water companies that are looking at and have been funding cover crops probably for nearly a decade now, if we really think about it. But when it comes to the scale of investment required, there's a few blockers that I think. I mean, first of all, these landscape recovery projects, the idea was the government were going to be pump priming them for the first 3 years and then the private sector would fund them. I still think that there's a long way to go for that to come to fruition. And we've got to really try and make sure that if the private market can't step into those landscape recovery bids or projects, then where it's pretty clear the outcomes they're going to be getting, then I worry how they're going to be able to act and fund at a lower scale and at perhaps a lower intensity of environmental delivery. I think the other thing that we have to have clarity about is, what is it the government are buying? When they pay us the public money for public goods, they need to have absolute clarity what it is they are buying from us, because then you enable the stacking of the private sector to come into that. But at this moment in time, I don't think we have that clarity from government what the payment is actually for. And then it creates a huge amount of nervousness around actually, the ability of that private sector to step in. And then finally, when it comes to things like carbon, I've always said I will only trade carbon when I have a fully auditable system, because if I sell carbon, my view is that the person who's bought it has a right to turn up on my farm 5 years later and say, right, I bought carbon from you in 2025. Where is it? And I need to have a system which can evidence where the carbon is stored that they bought those carbon credits for. And I don't have that system on my farm at the moment. And so I think that there is still a lot of blockers to actually getting to a place where the private sector can really function and at a scale which is applicable to the majority of farmers, and it's not just at a very large scale.
Definitely, we've identified and are also speaking to government about that point you've just raised around clarity around where stack payments can actually happen. I think there's certain schemes that they have been quite clear. I think the UCO forestry planting, you can top up with carbon, but you can't sell a B&G unit. Nutrient neutrality, bit of nuance, B&G, but I think we've got to think a bit more big picture, and just if government can be a bit clearer on what is and is not double funding and where is stacked payments available, we will hopefully then see those markets be more confident. And hearing water companies being nervous about double funding is not a good position to be in. If they've got money and they want their operational costs to drop, farmers are a great place to work, but we just need that clarity from government around that double payment point. Martin, I guess just before I move on to the Q&A, because there's lots of questions coming in, do you see a world where farming can rely on its own output production without the need of a public scheme? I.e., is there a utopia that we're trying to hit where farming is back to being profitable, where it's resilient and sustainable, and it's looking after its own revenue without there being a public scheme?
I think it's for me, there's two parts in this. One, there are some core costs in my business that are maintaining the environment, and to enhance it, that's additional cost. If society wants additional biodiversity and other things, that's got to be funded somehow. Unless I get a lot of profit from somewhere else and I choose to do it. But for many businesses, they look at the environmental outcomes. They can do some to meet regulatory requirements, but that enhancement has an additional cost. And if we want to have extra stone walls, hedges, and a beautiful landscape, thriving for nature, that's got to be kind of balanced out, and there's got to be some reward. Now, whether that's the supply chain, public payments, and others, money needs to flow or be joined up to other outcomes I'm producing. And then there's another part of food resilience, farm resilience, landscape resilience, of what is the public's contribution to make sure we have a resilient agriculture sector. And if they undermine us with trade deals that bring in different products below our standards, our market produce is not in a fair market. That doesn't work. So I think there's got to be a bigger conversation with society and governments across the UK of what is the public support in making sure that facility to produce food and a landscape that's healthy and fit to produce the food is there for the future. And I don't think we're having that in England conversation yet. In Wales, they're looking at a whole farm in Welsh government, they're valuing farmers and rural business as a part of their funding package, and they're similar in Scotland. So what is it that we want public funding to do in England, and how will it be divided up, and in what measures and matrix, so the right money can flow to the right places?
And that's a really important part, Martin, isn't it? That in Wales, the culture and heritage value is being valued at £107 a hectare. And when I think about where the transition over the last 3 years has been most difficult, it's probably in our cherished landscapes in the uplands,
Yeah.
Where the schemes really haven't worked, and where the culture sits at the heart of those communities. You rip out the farming, you rip out the people. What do you have left in the middle of winter when the tourists aren't there? And I think that is the critical element that at the moment just is being completely overlooked. And the fabric of our rural communities that farming sits at the heart of, again, it feels like it is being taken for granted, and yet the landscape doesn't look the way it does by accident. And so there's so much here to intertwine. And the bit on trade, for me, long term, that is still the biggest determinant of the future success of UK agriculture. Is if we have to compete with food imported to lower standards, then it's going to be incredibly difficult. And that brings us into the really difficult area of talking about the value of food and it being too cheap. I mean, at a time where a lot of people can't afford it, that's an awful conversation to be having. But if we want to deliver everything that we want within our landscapes, and then we want thriving farming businesses that can do that, we've got to be able to make a return from the production of food, and not be undermined by those imports. And it could be Polish poultry is the big one at the moment for me. I mean, we've got a lot of Polish poultry coming in as we've driven up our standards of production. And look, our poultry farmers are making good money at the moment, but we can't get planning to build new sheds. So we've driven up our standards, reduced our stocking densities, and all we're doing is drawing in more Polish poultry produced to the old standards, which we've said are not good enough here. It's just complete hypocrisy.
And the one lever that we are focusing a lot of effort on is the retailers. I think the retailers have a lot to do here. There are obviously lots of people backing British farming, but understanding the value of that food and making sure their customers are educated on the value of that food. And that's both the value it brings to society and nature, but also just like animal welfare and local, and obviously its carbon footprint. So I think there's a huge role, and we are working very closely with a number of supermarkets that they can play for good, for positive change. And that includes, that important point. So when you walk into a local store and you see farm venison from New Zealand, that blows my mind. Like, that should just be banned. But loads of great stuff, loads that we can talk about. But I'm just conscious of time. I'm going to move on to some questions and answers from the audience, because loads are coming through. So if anyone has got a question, please put it in the chat. We've got 33. I'm not sure if we're going to be able to get through them all. But first question from Kaz to Tom is, what's the steer regarding the Countryside Stewardship mid-tier extension versus an early adoption of SFI 25 or 26? Is SFI 26 going to be a better scheme? Are they going to be disadvantaged if they accept the mid-tier extension?
Look, all I can say is bird in the hand. And I don't think any of us have enough clarity around what SFI 26 is going to look like or when it's going to be available. We are pushing government to have a scheme ready as quickly as possible, but within the realms of the available budget, I don't expect there to be a scheme available or that's open to all in the next 6 months. So I think all you can do here is say, what do I know that I'm being offered versus what do I hope? And I think the other thing that we have to expect is that the SFI will be different. Now, whether that's just budget caps that are brought into it, or whether there is different options that are bundled together, there's various different rumours, and if I listen to every one of them, you could end up with vastly different schemes. So, but I think it's fair to say it won't be the offer that was available before it was withdrawn.
Thanks. And we'd always say, reach out to an advisor. And if you need to be put in touch with someone, these networks can help you, whether it's the NFU, Land App, Nature Friendly Farming, please get in touch. Question for Martin is, following on from the mid-tier extension, is there any talk around a further HLS extension or a higher tier, as many of the common land options were not included in the mid-tier?
For HLS agreement holders, they should have been contacted if you're getting an opportunity to go forward. Unfortunately, there's a lot of people that haven't been contacted or progressed, and there's a number of those who are in HLS agreements. There's over 200 that will be coming to an end without an opportunity. So we raise it with ministers and civil servants to sort of say there is a further people that are going to be left out. But their conversations continue, and until we have certainty of what the new scheme will deliver and when, it is leaving people exposed. So we continue to raise it and hopeful there's something available to them as soon as possible.
Just continuing on that, Martin, got a question here from William saying he might have missed it, but is there any colour on whether the new SFI scheme will be broad and shallow, i.e. accessible to most farmers, or will it be more narrow and targeted on particular landscapes?
I don't think we have the full details of actually what they want to put in it. That we know there's a limited budget. As Tom said, it may not. We don't think it's going to be available for everybody, possibly. But hopefully, we have enough within it that everybody can get something. Because what we don't want to see is what we currently have is roughly half the farmers are in some schemes and half the farmers aren't. We need to make sure that everyone who can contributes and gets some reward to deliver those public goods and have some benefits flowing into their banks of delivering those and getting funded for them.
Yeah. Come over to you, Tom. So the government, this is from Anonymous, the government's agenda around growth, housing, development seems to be at the detriment to rural communities and the environment. How can we convince government to recognise the importance of investing in value in rural businesses, communities, and the beautiful landscapes therein?
I think we have to question whether we are actually being victimized, or whether when you build houses, the impact is going to be on agricultural land, potentially. And so if you look at something like the new garden or garden towns or whatever they call it, in garden villages, there will be a loss of agricultural land. If there's an acceptance we need the houses, there will always be that loss of agricultural land to provide what is needed for society. So there's always an inbuilt tension, but are we being targeted, or is it just the inbuilt tension? And I think that's something we have to try and explore to try and get to the correct answer. I think the issue that I have is that at the moment they are willing to try and do everything possible to unlock the planning system, even to the point that what's going to happen to BNG? Is it all going to go into the Nature Restoration Fund? How is that then going to be administered? Where the delivery of environmental is slowing down projects, the house building companies seem to have the ear of government, and may unlock it. Now, BNG was something that farms were going to be very well placed to deliver. And if it was deemed that it's more important than food production, and the farm can deliver that, well, there's an economic opportunity for the farm business. How that's all going to be unwound and delivered now, I think, is really important. Solar farms and solar energy, the actual percentage of land which is going into solar production is going to be very small. But if you are in an area where you've got a mass conglomeration of solar farms, it has a dramatic impact on that farmed environment. The relationship between tenants and landlords, and then land which is going into these other assets, is also one which is incredibly important. So I think it's a really complicated picture there as to why or how do we cut through. I think the thing that farming can do uniquely is that we touch every constituency in the country. And that is where our message can be so powerful, that if they want growth, we can deliver that in areas of the country that they can't get to in any other way. But to do that, we need clarity, we need confidence. That certainty of policy is essential. The planning system that works, because often it's a blocker for farming, just like it's a blocker for other things. Water security is going to be absolutely crucial as we move forwards as well. So I think we can make a case about the importance of farming, not just for food production, but in those rural areas, in those rural communities, delivering for economic growth in a way which actually very few other businesses are able to.
We've got to take that holistic view, and we've got to have the clarity that's there. Martin, we just want to talk about a specific scheme that a lot of our users are in, which not in yet, but landscape recovery. How optimistic are you about landscape recovery and its delivery into the future?
I think it's a great opportunity. It's a good scheme, but we've got to get that money to flow, and we've got to get the matrix and measures. I understand a lot of those that are in the development stages and trying to move it on are having real difficulties around the legality of it and the signing contracts and the 30-year vision, but who can exit when and what time frame, and where the government wants to hold its position of being able to remove itself from those schemes. So I think they're a good opportunity. I've seen some farms really seen some benefits by looking at what else they can deliver in their landscape, to storing water, to other features that their land is better placed for, to get better incomes from. But we need to make this work and make the money markets work, the private money work. And that goes back to the earlier conversation. What are the measures and matrix? Where are the KPIs and the delivery and the return to investment for private funders that can go on their balance sheet? We've got to value nature on a balance sheet to then actually be able to turn it into revenue streams for the future.
Yeah, we've been working with a lot of landscape recovery projects, and I am blown away with the amount of effort and planning that's gone in. And so what I would say is, anyone out there who's in a landscape recovery scheme that's not yet been accepted or it's looking nervous, it's been a perfect catalyst to get everyone a cohesive plan, because that is exactly what the private market's going to want. So agnostic to whether government go for it, there's a lot of people out there that are going to try and support these landscape recoveries becoming a reality. So it's not wasted time. It can just sometimes feel in the short term frustrating.
It's definitely not wasted time. And I think if you don't end up in landscape recovery, you'll end up in a good farm cluster, and you may be able to bring there's a farm cluster for knowledge exchange. You've brought people together, but there's also that opportunity in maybe a smaller scale to bring funding in to work in catchments and clusters, because I think that really is the opportunity of farmers working together on the ground, sharing support, knowledge and experience, but bringing funding in to deliver outcomes through our farming practices, through our farmed landscapes, not necessarily nature reserves and land set aside, and about keeping farmers farming, but delivering a range of outcomes.
Yeah. And just one quick question, Martin, on landscape recovery. Is there going to be a third round?
We'll wait and see.
Let's see. Thanks. Question for Tom from Grace. Is there expected to be another round of capital grants offers in 2026? Is there also expected to be another round of FETF, which is testing my knowledge? I don't know what FET.
Farm Equipment Technology Fund.
Thank you.
I think there is, but details and budgets are again not known. So I expect there will be, but how much money will be allocated to them, I don't know.
Keep your eye out, I would say. But yeah, it just comes back to that clarity piece. We're expecting more news from DEFRA. And if any of the policymakers are on the call that want to have a conversation with anyone, the sector is here to help. Please don't feel like you need to, burrow down. We really want to help articulate and share and market great schemes that are happening as well. Just a question, we've kind of touched on this already, but I guess, Tom, just continue with you. What role do you think supermarkets have to play as a key force in the market?
I mean, first of all, I think it comes down to standards of production in terms of if they're not undermining our standards of production. We've seen when the protein markets got moved up and arguably to levels that we need to get a fair return on the investment in the red meat sector. But as that protein values have moved up, we've suddenly seen more Australian and some of that making its way through to retail shelves. So sourcing commitments to British and not undermining is going to be really, really important, because then you can actually get the returns from the product. They're going to have a role to play. Whether they're willing to pay for it or not, that's the critical element. Because if it becomes a condition of supply, then the market isn't going to reward that. And I think this is where it's easy for them to drive standards of production, but if that doesn't turn into value when there is a cost of delivering it on farm, the sector has been squeezed for too long and there isn't anything left to give. And so I think that's the crucial element, is how are they going to make sure there's a return for the systems of production that they may demand. And arguably food price inflation is going to be a barrier to a lot of that.
And if I'm coming out, I think that they're going to have to be more flexible as we're seeing climate impacts happen of extreme wet, extreme dry. The quality and the availability and the yield of produce is going to vary each year. What we don't want to see is farmers getting penalised because they're not being able to meet the specification that the supermarket sets. So there's got to be some more longer term contracts and flexibility that meets the weather challenges that we've increasingly seen.
Building those long-term relationships, like the farm groups that we're working on that have been supplying the same retailer for 30 years, have got really nice networks, but it's those shorter term contract-based discussions that mean further planning ahead is hard. I guess, Martin, just to kind of tease out a little bit more, what are the levers the supermarkets currently pulling, or I guess supply chains currently pulling, to try and help the transition towards more nature-friendly farming?
But we see many of the supply chain offers enhanced payments for regenerative actions or helping collect data. But it goes back to the challenge that they're all measuring things slightly differently. And we need one standard set of data to measure our carbon, biodiversity, profitability, and to benchmark ourselves and really drive our industry forward. So we are seeing some come forward, but my real concern is it's only going to be for some farmers, where there's a direct connection to your mill, your malter, your crusher for your oilseed rape and the cereals sector bit. That's opportunities, but we need to have that kind of joined up of, if we want resilient supply chains, we need resilient soils, we need resilient businesses, and they have a contribution to invest with us to do that.
We've got to use the supermarkets and the wider networks as a force for good to try and build the system from the soil upwards. There's too much depleted soil in this country, and if we can find a system that supports that while also continuing to produce food, I think we're going to be in a better place.
But Dan, just on that, look, so I absolutely agree that we've got to build a systems-based approach that for the long term looks after biodiversity, that builds soil carbon, but to do that, we have to have a level playing field. Because if we, even if it's a short-term thing, but if we increase our cost of production and we can't get that back from the marketplace because we drive more imports, and there's a question about the out-of-home market, which I absolutely agree with, saying that 50% by value nearly is purchased out of the home, and the lack of transparency in that sector is something that you don't have any idea where a lot of those ingredients are coming from. But unless we have those core standards, and this is where we've been working with the likes of WWF to try and push government to implement core standards within trade, so that we do have that level playing field, because long term, that is going to be the decisive action that means that a systems-based approach here may well get the rewards that it needs. But if we try and shift a system here without having the guarantees and the commitments that we're not going to be undermined by imports, what you end up doing potentially is making the cost of production higher without actually being able to get it back from the marketplace.
Yeah, if the system's leaky and you can be undercut, it's going to undermine the whole thing. Gosh, it's such a big topic. And I guess going back to that policy, Tom, is there anything particularly right now that the Secretary of State should be focusing on as that key element? Is it that setting those trade standards?
Well, the trouble is that our Secretary of State may decide that's a wonderful idea, and then they'll go and have a conversation with Treasury, and Treasury might say, well, what does that mean for food prices? And then they'll go and have a conversation with DBT, and DBT will say, well, agriculture is always the most difficult chapter to do within trade. Are you now saying we're going to make it even harder? And you can see where very quickly this starts to become problematic for any government, which is why it's not got over the line. But it's a very real challenge.
Yes. Right, we've got 4 minutes left. There's still quite a few questions, but I think just to kind of wrap it up, I wanted to try and finish on positive note around looking forward. So Martin, just starting with you, what out of all of the discussions you're having with politicians and the wider land sector, what's giving you the most hope and optimism for the future?
I think there's a realization from many of the supply chain finances that this transition is happening, weather's already impacting, markets are impacting, but actually the core of it is getting healthy soil and a healthy system working and helping farmers understanding their true costs of production and where they could maybe reduce some inputs and get a better, a more balanced return, meeting a changing weather market. And having that joined up and sort of there's a number of conversations where the supply chain, the finance, the government's payments and support is all coming in the same kind of direction, but we just need clarity and bring that together. And actually, I see many farmers that are actually adapting their farming system and becoming more resilient, not always profitable, but they're not avoiding the losses as bad, particularly as the weather impacts more. So it's about building a resilient business that can take opportunities as they come along.
Martin, same question to you, Tom.
Look, I mean, I think we've had the most dramatic shift in policy in decades with the move to public money for public goods away from the old support schemes. What we're seeing at times of extremes is the role that those direct support payments played in terms of volatility management. Now, look, we're not going backwards, but I think when you look at the new schemes, it is earned income, it is a contract for services provided to society, and it is only ever going to be the cream within a business now. It is never going to be the cake. And I think that we have to be able to adapt and evolve our businesses as farmers we need to build the resilience for the long term, absolutely. But we cannot be relying on that government pound to be what is keeping those businesses going. And so there's going to be some long-term strategic changes, I think, for many businesses. And today, I really worry about the arable sector. When I look at the global commodity markets, we look at the last 2 years of extreme weather that we've had here with extreme wet and then extreme dry. I worry that the US insurance system effectively means that we are in a system of overproduction every year because they know what their maximum loss is. And I don't know for the arable sector quite how we solve the problem. It is, so yes, we need the schemes and we need the funding, but actually we're going to have to take a look at within our own businesses as well and control the things that are within our control. And I think that that's probably, if we're sitting here thinking the answer is going to come out of central government, I think we're kidding ourselves. I think what we've got to do is try and take control where we can of the cost within our businesses and create our own future as much as possible, and then take the government money as the cream on the cake.
Oh, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Just going to wrap up by saying, firstly, thank you to Tom and to Martin for your time. Secondly, if anyone out there would like to just book a call with one of the Land App team to talk about how the Land App may be able to help, Rosie's details are on the screen now, or you can visit our website, thelandapp.com. But thank you so much for listening. Really appreciate it. And I'm happy to stay around for a couple of minutes if anyone wants to come off mute and have a conversation. But Tom, hopefully the Christmas cake is cooked and not burnt. And Martin, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Cheers, everybody.
Thank you. Great. So we'll stop the recording. I think it might be stopped already.